Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is our regular monthly meeting on Tuesdays. This is your host, Juan Soto, Microsoft Access MVP, also the founder of AccessUserGroups.org. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We appreciate that. If you've been here before, thank you very much for your ongoing support. We have quite a few things to talk about today and demos. This is the third chapter in the Access with SQL Server Academy series. We're going to have another one next month as well. And where we help people who have never used SQL Server to be able to take advantage, right? We help you make that transition from Access developer to Access and SQL Server developer. If you missed the other three chapters, they're all on our YouTube channel. Just search AccessUserGroups.org and go to the Access with SQL Server channel list, and you'll see all our recent, the most recent classes. We urge you to go through those. The first session we had was how to get started with the Access to SQL Server, and the second was on SSMA. And today we're going to be talking about DSN links, and why you should use DSN-Less links instead of DSN. What's the difference between the two? And we're going to be providing some free code at the end of the session. So if you're listening to this recording on the YouTube channel after the session, there is an embargo, a 30-day embargo, after which I'll be sharing the code, because I really want to provide the people who were here with the ability to get the code right away, right? So you guys who showed up tonight are going to get the code right away. Everybody who's listening to this on YouTube will get this 30 days later. So thank you so much it's my little token appreciation for you guys to show up tonight. Okay, so I'll be uploading that to the web while Mark is doing the presentation, and then towards the end, I'll have a link for you guys to download the sample demo. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Yeah, hi, John Soto, Venu here. Sorry for interrupt. This is my first session, and
welcome.
Yeah, hi, thank you. And Maria suggested me to join this group, as I'm having some doubts to migrate SQL Server from MS Access to SQL Server.
Sure.
I have done everything, but if you allow me to say, or if you allow me to, explore more, then I can explain now, or else just let me know when is the good time to elaborate my issue.
Sure. Well, we usually have a Q&A session at the end of the meeting. That will be your chance to talk about this at that point. But welcome. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all.
All right. So I had hoped to give you a demo of OpenAI chat, right? The ChatGPT. But currently, you should be able to see my screen, by the way. Currently, there is at capacity right now. But I had played around with the chat service, and I'm going to give you this URL here. Let me copy the link. And I had asked the VBA questions. Now, in this case, on my Facebook page, I asked the chat to write a short love story of two robots stranded on Mars. And the AI came back with this very, very nice little short story. Once there were two robots named Max and Chloe who were stranded on that planet Mars, right? It goes on and on. Actually, it's a pretty nice chat story, right? And then I had in the past, and unfortunately I didn't do a screenshot of this, I asked, write me a VBA function that calculates the first of the month. And it did a great job. It says, here's the VBA code for the right. So if it does come back tonight, this has been a lot of press on OpenAI, ChatGPT. If it does come back, we will definitely get back to this. I'll show you some of the stuff that we're doing, and as well as some new queries. But I'm excited about this, and actually asked the chat to create a query, right? So please create a SQL query that will calculate the highest sale and the lowest sale for the last 30 days in a table called TBL sales. And they came back with a query, right? Now, Do I expect this to open AI to create entire Microsoft Access databases? No. But keep in mind that when I was learning how to query and I was asking Google for help, right? I would say, I need a query to calculate total sales. And I would look at examples of what other people had written on the web, and I would modify their query to work for my needs, right? So if their query said TBL sales, mine may have said TBL production, I would swap out sales with production. But if you can ask the AI to create a query, so show me the sales for the top 3 salespeople. So create a query for the top 3 salespeople from a table called TBL sales, where the salesperson name is in the salesperson ID column for the last 3 months, right? So you supply the table name, you supply the field names, you supply a query, the criteria, and it comes back with a fully formatted query that you can then paste into Access. I mean, that's scary. I mean, it was just pretty impressive. And darn it, I wish I would have taken some screenshots, because as of right now, it looks like it's packed. Oh, here it is. It's back. Do it to our system previous conversations. All right, let's do this, right? Create SQL query that will calculate the first of the month. All right, let's see what it says. Here's a sample query. Select date, trunk, month, right? That's first of the month. All right, pretty standard stuff, right? So now I'm going to ask it, okay, create a VBA function that calculates the first of the month. Function first of month as date. First of month equal date serial. You can use this function in VBA code by passing the date as an input. For example, I'm like, okay, so now I can click on query, copy code, right? And then copy and paste it into my, let's see if we can get a little bit more aggressive. Create VBA function that calculates the first of the month or the last of the month, based on the parameter passed. Let's see. I mean, I haven't tried this. Let's see if this works, right? All right. So open ChatGPT is saying, okay, this is the function month start end. Not a bad name for a function, right? Function month start end. DTE is date, start end is string is date. If start end start, then oh my God, this is uncanny. This is blowing me away. I don't know about you guys, but the hairs on my forearm are standing up. Uncanny, because again, I could find examples of VBA code that do this on the web, but then the fact that I can supply field names and now create after register. So I just put it in the comments there. No, I didn't put it in the comments here. Let me bring up the comment. All right, I'll get that in a second, but let me go ahead and do this. SQL query that will calculate the top 3 sales, right? By a salesperson in a table called TBL sales using a field called total sales. Select salesperson total sales from TBL sales order by limit 3. All right. So I'm impressed. Call me impressed. It's really something else. So let me go ahead and put the ChatGPT in the comments there. And yeah, so I've been playing about this. Look, the day is still not here where we think that this can create entire solutions. But this is great for people who are just starting with Access, right? They need to be able to have a mentor that can walk them through how to create the functions, how to create subroutines, right? I mean, we can go on and on, right, to create a VBA function that iterates to all the table records, right? And I'm wondering to myself, is it going to use a record source, a record cursor, right? Table cursor to record set cursor that will go through the records and all that. And I'll be playing with this a lot. So I see that some people, Ben has already started playing with ChatGPT. That's good to hear. It's in the comments, so you can see in the comments there. All right. So look, I'm gonna go stop sharing now. So today's presentation, we have a special presenter. His name is Mark Edwards. He is a senior Access consultant at IT Impact. He has been with the firm now. How many years now, Mark?
2.
2 years, and he's my employee. And I've asked him to help us out. He was gracious enough to do that. He's wearing his famous Microsoft IT Impact Access shirt, which I didn't wear today. Thank you very much for the plug there, Mark. Thank you. Mark bleeds my IT Impact blue blood. All right. So if you, he's really been an essential member of my team now for quite some time, the last 2 years. He has a ton of experience, and I'm going to pass the baton over to Mark so that he can then present. So let me just search your name here in the list. We got 23 people here. Welcome, everyone.
All right.
Edwards. And I'm going to pass you the host. Let's see here. Chat pin, make host. Now, today we are going to talk about DSN versus DSN connections, right? So for those who have no idea what DSN is, DSN stands for, what does DSN stand for? Because I know the first D stands for data and the N stands for name, right? Don't know what S stands for. Source, data source. Thank you very much. Panel, ODBC connections, create a DSN to your SQL Server, call it whatever you like, production or whatever you want. And then you can go into Access and use that DSN to link your tables from SQL Server to Access frontend. There are several advantages and disadvantages. It's very easy to create the DSN and then just use there. But the disadvantage is that then you have to create that DSN every workstation. If you have 20 desktops, that's 20 DSNs. Every time there's a new desktop purchase or somebody configures for use for a database, a new employee comes online, you got to make sure they have the DSN. So it can be a pain to manage this DSN. And the other problem with this is, what if you have multiple databases, right? A company may have 3, 4, 5 databases. And instead of having 3 or 4 or 5 DSNs, it can be quite unwieldy. And so Mark is going to demonstrate a great example how to use DSN code to create DSN-Less. All right, so I'm gonna drop my camera, see if that helps. Thank you for doing that, mentioning that. All right, hopefully this helps. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, you have it like that.
Okay. So yeah, ChatGPT. I don't know if they can impersonate me yet, but we'll see if one day if we pass away and we're replaced by an AI called Juan Soto. All right, Mark, take it away.
All right, let me go ahead and share my screen and get set up here on what we're going to do. I'm going to, first of all, have to launch my window so we can have the window here. I just wanted to show the window because I've got a super huge screen, and that is going to be small unless I can pick that one specific screen. Which, there we go. That looks like it. We're going to share it. Okay, hopefully everybody can see an Access database. So,
yep, we're seeing it. Thank you, Mark.
all right, you got that. Okay, what we're going to do here is just demonstrate how to link tables from SQL Server to Access using a DSN-Less connection and a few little configuration tables in the application. We've got 3 configuration tables that you set up. First one is a connection table, which has the different connection parameters that you put in an ODBC and OLEDB connector. But you've got ways to identify the various environments. You've got environments like development environment, beta, production environment, which of course you use with different databases. The type of connection and connection name is a default. Type of security mechanism, which for us is going to be SSA, SQL security authorization, which is the username and login. We've got a table name that we check for connection, and we've got the name of the ODBC driver that we want to use and the name of the OLEDB provider. We also have the server name that we're going to use, the port, which you can specify, and the database. We've got 3 databases. We've got a beta database, a development database, and a production. So we've got our parameters for the connection in here. And we also have a list of tables that we want to link. The connection that we want to use to link them, the schema name for them, the table or view name in SQL Server, and what we want to link it as on the access end. Now for a view, you probably know a lot of times if you link views, you don't have a primary key on it, and therefore it's a read-only view. If you want to make the view editable, you can also put a primary key index on it, and you put it on the field. So we have a field name here that we're going to use to put that primary key, and we'll show you how that works in just a moment. So now we've got our list of tables that we want to put in there, and we've got some program options that we want to be able to pull from. We've got the SQL Server username that we want to track and record in here. Whether or not we want a full relink or just a refresh using a checkbox, whether yes or no, and use which connection. If we have multiple connections, that's going to matter, but in case there's only one, like our default, we just use that one. Then use which environment, which we want to use beta, or we want to use the development, or we want to use production. And those are our 3 tables that we're going to use. I've also got in the in here, we've got a pass-through query with a connection on it, which I am going to open up, and I'm going to trash the connection string. And this way, this thing is not going to work. And so we can check and see if it's fixed, because we also, one of the things we want to do with this is not only connect the tables, but we also want to fix any pass-through queries that use that connection.
Hey, Mark, I just want to chime in here that
Sure.
views are just queries. They're called queries in SQL Server, so they're views.
Right.
And when you link them to the Access front end,
Mm-hmm.
they will show up as regular tables, although they're queries in SQL Server.
Right. They will be linked. They will fall under the table section in your navigation pane.
Correct.
That say group as tables. And since views don't have primary keys on them on the SQL Server end, you're not going to get a primary key on the Access end after it's linked. So therefore, it'll be read-only unless you tell Access to put a primary key on it. And that's one of the things we're going to.
Yeah. Now you can also pass-through query. We probably should mention this for people who are new to SQL Server. Pass-through query is a special kind of query in Access that you can pass anything to SQL Server. Right? It's not. It's like if you were using the SQL Server Management Studio and typing in the query. Anything you type in SQL Server Management Studio, you can also type in the pass-through query. So you can create tables, drop tables, add a field to the table. If you use the right SQL syntax, you can do anything with SQL Server that you normally would use with the console. And so, unfortunately, with most relinking code that you see out on the web, does not update a pass-through query. So Mark is going to show you how, in this example, how it updates not just the tables, but also your pass-through queries.
And you put T-SQL in a pass-through query, and not only can you pull records with a select query, but you can put one or more multiple action queries, like update this, append that, whatever. You can put them all in one pass-through query and run the whole batch at one time if you want to. So it's a lot of things you can do with a pass-through query. They're also great for using for row sources, for drop boxes and list boxes, since those things aren't editable. They're not editable queries, and they're read-only, so they're very quick and very efficient because they run on the server. For those folks who aren't familiar with pass-through queries. Okay, I've also got a README down here, README module that is way outside the peripherals of my window here. So let me shrink this up so you can see it. There we go. But I've got a little README here that explains some of the things that you can do with this thing, how it works. So for those of you who get the code, be sure and check out the README that we've got located in here. Okay, one of the things I'm going to do here at first, before we start, is I'm going to open up a form that shows you what we have in the connection table, what we have in the linked table query. These are the two that we fix and put what we need in there before we run this thing. Those are prerequisites that we do to run the code in the linked tables and update it. Now the program option table is going to be empty. We don't have any values in the text value. We're going to be recording the username of the person. We're going to be recording what connection they use and what environment they're using under, and whether or not they want to do a full link. And also we have the MSysObject tables here on the bottom that will show us a list of the tables that we've linked and will show us the connection string. And one of the things that this thing does is that it enables you to link the tables without storing the username and password in the connection string. So that's not in there. So that's a great thing to have with something like this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close this form and I'm going to run this application. And we'll just run it. Notice that we don't have any linked tables in here yet. I'm going to go ahead and run it. We're going to select the connection name that we want to use. We're going to select the environment that we want to use, which is we're going to go with production. And we're going to type our username. And we're going to type our password.
And by the way, you're going to be getting the sample database tonight. So you'll be able to see this form, run this form on your local SQL Server databases.
And so we put in the parameters that we want. Now you can put in these parameters however you want to. You might not even make them available to the user to put in. You can lock them down in your application. So all they have to put in is the username and password. But we've got it in there. We're going to go ahead and log in. And if it runs successfully, we get our table form back again so we can see the changes. As you can see, we've recorded the username, we've recorded the connection, we've recorded the production, the environment that we want, and we've also put in the optional value for a relink. So every time it runs, it'll relink the table full. We can uncheck it if we want to do a just refresh only, compare the links, and if they're the same, leave them alone. Big thing here is you see that we have our 3 tables that we have linked together, and you'll see from the connection string that we have no username or password. So we're safe on that, a little bit of security for handling that. And we can see our link. I'm going to run a query here.
Hey, Mark, because you're the host now, you should you might be getting a notification. People are waiting to come into the meeting. So if you do see those, please click on admit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they might be showing up there at the top there somewhere for you.
Yeah. How would I see some chats? But
yeah, but the participants, go to the list of participants just in case somebody's trying to get into
waiting
the
room,
meeting.
George Hepworth. I'm going to admit him. Thanks for letting me know.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got 2 that I needed to do that too. Thanks
All
for
right.
letting me know that
So
they were.
keep an eye out for that. Thank you.
I
Yeah,
will.
you know, this form that you created, Mark, I love this form, right? This is something I have not used in the past. And I love the fact that you've got the TBL connection there and the tblLinkedTable contents and the program options. So this is really, really good stuff. And again, everybody's going to get a copy of this at the end of the night.
All righty. And as you can see on our linked view, if we go to design view on this, you can see that we have a primary key. So that means that this table, this view rather, is editable. Any questions? That's basically it. We're now got our linked tables with no username or password in there. Everything is pretty secure, and we've got it. Also, remember our test query down here that we messed up that didn't run? Now it runs.
All right, can you go into the query Pass-Thru query properties, and let's show them where they put the connection to the SQL Server?
That's over here on the ODBC.
Yeah. So the code that Mark is supplying you today is going to check for every Pass-Thru query that you have and automatically update this property. And you'll have access to the code and you can throw through the code. I don't want to dive too much in the code because I'm not a big fan of going step-by-step code execution. But you should be able to analyze the code on your own and be able to come up with the conclusion how it works. But in this case,
hello, you dropped out.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you now.
So say, for example, that you've got a how can I say this? A production database, right? That's in production. Then you want to experiment with some new queries and tables and forms. You would create a beta database, and that often happens with IT Impact. Most of our clients have a production database and a beta database. Well, with Mark's code, you can specify how do you want to connect, which one you want to connect. You don't have to go into the code itself. You just do that, and that's driven by the TBL connection, right? So let's go over the TBL connection table contents there, Mark, at the very top there.
Yep.
All right, so the login is the security mechanism. That's using SQL Server login, but you should be able to modify this code with little modification to use Windows authentication, right? So in other words, what does that mean? If you belong to a domain network, you're at work, and your SQL Server is on the same domain network, you could use Windows credentials to connect with this database without having to use the login form that Mark has provided you. Right, so you can switch it from login to Windows authentication if you like. And then notice that there is 3 environments. Could you expand that second column there for me, Mark? It says environment. It's missing the T there. All right. Now, when would you have a development environment? Well, you have a development environment when you want to play with concepts. You're not necessarily going to release it to a beta team. You may have a development environment. You don't have to have 3 records in this table. You can just have a beta and a production record. And then when you log in, you can specify which one you're logging into in that login form that Mark created. I want to highlight a couple things in this connection table. If you go over to the table name for linking tests, you'll notice that he put in TBL document. That column is critical because the codes on startup will see if this column, if this table is present or not. And if it's not, it's going to trigger a complete relinking of every table that you specified in that linked table, which is the second form here we got there. Then you'll notice there's an ODBC driver there and an OLADB driver. A lot of you are still using older drivers. I don't recommend that. I recommend you use the latest and greatest. Right now, the latest and greatest is ODBC driver 18. Mark wasn't using it for this demo because he had some issues with the SQL Server Express versions that he's using. But if you can't use 18, use 17. Please don't use the driver that comes with Windows. That thing is The 2001 era is way overdue. And these latest drivers, ODBC drivers, like I mentioned in prior sessions of the Academy, are specifically designed to connect with Azure. So if your SQL Server is stored in Azure or using the Azure SQL Service, use either 17 or 18, if you will. And then MSODB SQL 18 or 19 also are good drivers to do this. Then this next parameter is a server. In this case, this is Mark's server. So you need to swap that out. I don't want to hear anybody calling me and says, Juan, the demo from Mark doesn't work. Did you update the server and the TBL connections table? Did you update the port, right? Did you update the database name? These are things that you need to update for your particular environment. So pay attention. Just go through all the columns when you get this code later on tonight and make sure you change them. The second table is called tblLinkedTable contents. Why is this important? Because of the fact that you may have 20, 30 tables to link back to the front end. And instead of hard coding them in your code, which a lot of code on the web does, if you go looking for DSN-less code on the web, they've hard coded the table names in the code. We don't want that. We want to use a table that's defined. We go as much in ITMP, we go as much as storing this table called tblLinkedTable on the actual server, because we don't want users messing with our code and changing which tables they can link to if they're not authorized to them, right? It's another security measure. So I recommend you keep tblLinkedTable on the server, but Mark and I decided to put it on the front end for this demo. And so it's here on the front end. But this link table is where you put all your table names. Now you notice that there's a database name already there. Right.
And
so
if this table is on SQL Server, you'll have the name of the SQL Server database that it's in there. But now it's here on the local machine. It's in the Access database. So the database name here doesn't really mean anything because we use the name of the database that's on the connection table. Because this database, these tables are in all three of the different databases: beta, the production, and the development.
Okay. So if you have 20 tables, right, you can do this. Now, we have a higher level version of this code at TMPAC where we can actually link multiple tables from different databases, right? For example, one of our clients might have an ERP database, and then they might have an accounting database, and they may have a quality control database. And so we sometimes have to connect with different SQL servers and different tables. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. You sometimes come across situations where you have to link tables from different databases, inclusive even some different servers altogether, right? So this code should be able to do that for you with little to no modifications. Now, I love this column he has there called access name. What that is sometimes you have a table that you're in the old Access version that you decide to make a query, a view in SQL Server, right? For whatever reason, and this happens a lot for us. And so what we'll do is what Mark and all the developers here at TMPAC do is we would preserve the table name in this column, even though it's called VW underscore whatever view in SQL Server, right? So on SQL Server starts with VW. Usually we name our views with VW, right? Underscore. And then an Access, it'll be called TBL something. So it's a great way to be able to swap out tables with views and not have to damage your code, because sometimes we're dealing with very complex Access databases. I'm actually flying out to Boston at the end of the month for a manufacturing company that's hired us to convert their Access to SQL Server. And this application has hundreds of table links. And I'm not going to, I'm not going to, hundreds of forms and queries and reports. And I'm not going to sit there and change the table name just because it's a view now in SQL Server. I want to preserve that because I don't want to break their application. I don't want to be able to search everything in the code that mentions that table. So keep an eye out for that access name. And like mentioned, the next column over index columns, can you highlight that column, index columns, please? And I know there's a couple of questions in the chat. We'll get to those in a second. Kent and Alphonse. But in index columns is important because if you intend to use the view as an editable in a form that's editable, right? Not read-only, but you need to edit records with a view. It must have an index. If you include those field names in this column, so for example, if you have a compound primary key that's document ID, comma, salesman ID, you can put that in there in this column. It'll create a primary, not primary, it'll create an index, excuse me, called document ID and salesman ID for you. This code does that. This is some pretty powerful code that we're sharing with everybody out there. I'm hoping you guys appreciate the efforts Mark put into this. But this is great because once you have that view and it's created the index, now you can edit data in that view. There is a caveat here. Now, I've seen this only happen a couple times. Sometimes SQL Server is confused as to which record you want to delete, right? So if I go in a form, I use this view as a second source for a form, and I delete the record on that form, SQL Server throws an error, says, you know, this view has 5 tables. I have no idea which table you want me to delete the record from, right? It's not obvious to SQL Server. So in that case, you need to use a trigger, what's called a delete trigger, and that's beyond the scope of this class, but you can search for delete triggers. Same thing when you insert a record. Sometimes SQL Server is like, I don't know which record table you want to insert a record to. In that case, we use an insert trigger. We try to stay away from triggers because they cause other issues with our database design. But sometimes you can't get away from it. You have to bite the bullet and do it. So it's just a way to do it. All right, and then TBL program options. Actually, if you search my blog for TBL program options, Clothier, I think it is on my blog, we use TBL program options to configure our Access databases when we roll it out to client, and we use it for storing variables between sessions. Let me explain myself. TBL program options is what we use when, so for example, somebody has selected a preference when it comes to sorting the report, and we create an option that table called an option under option name, we call it report preference sort orders, whatever you want to call it. And we set the option there. The next time they go into the database and run that report, it'll look at TBL program options. So in other words, it's not relying on a variable in memory. It's not relying on the value in the form. So that's why we call it a storing variables in the between sessions. And I have a great blog post on that. Just search the web blog for TBL program options. All right, so we have a couple questions here, Mark.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Yeah, the first one is from, let's see, from Mill. Are those all the tables in View and DB you connected to? Yes, those are the ones. What if I want to automatically connect to the DB without prompting for it? What do you mean by that, Mill? Let me know if you want to unmute yourself. I don't want to enter a password. Okay. If you don't want to enter a password, you need to use Windows security, right? And then you would just modify this code to not use password or username, and you would bypass the login form or make the username and password fields hidden, and then you can just do that, right? So he's got the Windows authentication, right? So notice that he's changed the Windows authentication right now. You can do that.
Now I need to, I have not tested Windows authentication on this model since we had planned to just use the login for this particular demo. So I was stripping out all the code I didn't need, and I may have removed that, but I can put it back in there and test and make sure that we have both the login method and the Windows authentication method.
Thanks. This is Millie. I just wanted to ask if it was possible to always connect to one database. Let's say I'm building this application in Access, and it's always going to connect to this one database. So I don't want to have to be prompted to choose a database or enter the password. Is that possible?
Yeah, that's normally what we do. Is once you set which database you want to be linked to, it'll always stay linked to that database every time you run it, unless you physically go in there and say, okay, I need to do some testing on a test database where I'm going to tear up some data. and I don't want to use production database, so I need to switch the connection to the beta database and testing database so I can run some tests. Then you would manually switch it from the environment that you want from production. You would switch it to the beta or development, and it would, the opening code would read beta from here and would say, okay, I need to go to the link to the database, and it will change the connections to link you from production to the database. But once you set the link, what database you want to use, you set the environment, it stays there.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So just to be clear, you should not have users link tables, right? In other words, it should be the developer's responsibility,
right,
to issue a version already with the tables linked. I don't see any scenario where users need to link tables, except for when you don't have access to that production environment. We have customers who hired us. We don't have access to their production environment. We don't have access to their beta environment. And so we send them this access front end, and we teach them to relink. Notice in the TBM program options, Mark, if you can highlight that record called relink, option name relink.
Yeah, hold on. Where's my mouse?
All right, so this is the option that you would check if you want the code to relink every time you log in. So every time you log in, you check this off. Mark, does your code uncheck it once it's done relinking?
No, this particular case, I didn't do that.
Okay.
I took out a lot of stuff, embellishments and things to make it simple so it doesn't overpower.
You could easily create a line of code that says, okay, once you relink, clear it out. That's what we do at IT Impact. We ever need to relink, the code automatically unchecks that. So the next time you start up, it doesn't relink, right?
Right.
So,
now, one thing I might mention is that when on this particular thing, if I wanted to start over and redo it, now that I've got values in there, if I redo it, you'll see that it reads those values and it updates this form, but you don't have to have these controls on this form. You could have just username and password. And once you hit login after putting in username and password, it will use all the other stuff that's already there to go ahead and log in and keep you on the what you had done before.
Okay, thank you.
all right, Alphonse, is this Alphonse, the co-chapter president for Europe, that submitted a question here? I think it is. Alphonse says, for tables with a single field PK, but with a unique index on multiple fields, Access usually makes the unique index the PK. Does your connection scheme include correcting that? Actually, I have not come across that situation. I don't know if Mark, if you have or not.
I'm trying to sit there and keep track of all these folks. I've had to let a few people in, but let me see. This is in the chat, right?
Yes, so it says that there is a bug that says that if you have a unique index on the table, it will ignore the primary key and just use the unique index. Honestly, I've never come across that phone. So if you have something on the official Microsoft Access blog that talks about that. Otherwise, if you have a scenario, if you're that I can submit to the Access team on this, is this a fairly recent blog? If you can give us some more information on that, that'd be great. Kent says here, Mike Wolfe had no longer said, by the way, I love this blog from Mike Wolfe. If you haven't been subscribed, please do go to nolongerset.com. He's probably one of the premier bloggers of Microsoft Access. Recently published VBA code to search your registry for the latest installed ODBC driver. I gotta look for that article. Thank you very much, Ken, for sharing that with us. Okay, and then here, Venu Babu, thank you for your comment here. I, Mark, and Juan, I have few tables in MS Access and moved all tables to SQL Server database with export option. I have linked these tables using linking manager use of Windows application. I have linked all tables from MSQL Server to MS Access, but while attempting to open MS front end application page, keep getting right conflict pop-up. When you get a right conflict pop-up, and we've seen this for people who just started like yourself, Don't forget to include every table on your SQL Server should have a particular field type of row version or timestamp. It's called, in the old days it was called timestamp. But you need to make sure that you have every table has that. If you searched, if you go to accessexperts.com/start here, I have a series of blog posts, and one of them talks about design criteria for tables in SQL Server that you're using to access, and that's one of the points we make there in that blog post. So go to accessexperts.com/start here and look for that blog post, and you'll be able to learn more about that. And Tom chimed in. Thank you very much, Tom, for chiming in on that. He's actually right. You need a timestamp field there.
Yes, you definitely want to add your row value, your timestamp field, link that, and that's almost as important as having a primary key on the SQL Server side when you're doing that.
Yeah, Mark, this is Venu. Sorry. So, where I need to add this timestamp table in a SQL Server?
Correct.
Yeah, but after linking the SQL Server, so it's a default value. Like, I mean, what is the timestamp? Is there a particular DL to follow, or how come I add? I mean, can you please
Mark, you want to
elaborate?
explain what the timestamp field is?
Well, the timestamp field is you simply go to design view on your table in SQL Server and SQL Server Management Studio. You put the table in design view, and you can add a field there. And one of the data types in the drop down is timestamp. You just set it as a timestamp. Now, if you do SSMA on the SQL Server, the migration assistant, if you have a whenever you use that to take your access tables and put them in SQL Server, the migration assistant will automatically put a timestamp field called MS timestamp or access timestamp on that new SQL Server table that you've migrated.
Yeah, if we use if we use a migration tool, right? Then not required.
SQL Server migration assistant, yes. They'll do that for you.
SQL Server migration tool. If we use that, so there will be no additional steps required, right?
We will do that for you. I mean, there is always additional steps, but it'll save you a lot of time. We talked about that last month. So go to youtube.com, search for Access User Group, and then click on the SQL Server with Access playlist. You'll see that it's already uploaded there. We talked a whole hour and a half on SQL Server Migration Assistant. Is a great start to doing that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that you can fix.
Because I tried multiple ways, but it no luck. So that it's my project is in a deadline, so I'm just worrying about that, how to resolve that issues, so that I'm.
In your current case, where you've already got tables in SQL Server, just open up SQL Server Management Studio, SSMS, and you can add a timestamp field to each table. You don't need to add the data to the timestamp field. SQL Server does that automatically for you. It's like a GUID string. So you just add the field at I usually add it at the bottom of, the last field. And then you add it and you forget about it. It's that easy.
Yeah, so you don't query against it. You don't read values for it. You only need one per table, and that's all discussed in the blog post and accessexperts.com/start here. And Cesardo put a link to it there. Plus, we talk about that extensively in our last prior month meeting. We have some other questions here from other people, so Banu, but
okay, sorry.
We'll get back to you if we have more time. Alphonse, everyone, I've seen the PK issue multiple times, and I have my own code to correct it. Just a simple table with identity PK and another unique index. George, who's a former Access MVP, and Ben asks, you guys seen this issue that Alphonse talk about, where it ignores the primary key and uses the index? I haven't had that issue at all.
I've not seen it, but I can't. I was tempted to test it tonight by just creating a quickie test SQL Server.
I have never observed it, but I don't tend to relink a lot of tables anymore. So
yeah. I may need to raise this issue with the Access team. So I need to create a sample database for them to do that. Don't get me started on the access team response. Oh boy. I'm tempted to go into this long discussion about the access team performance. Ben says, for your information, the timestamp field has nothing to do with the end time. Thank you very much, Ben. George Hepworth also talks about the timestamp. See, Tom Workroff, it's hard to teach old dogs new tricks, or names in this case.
Well, because George calls it Rowversion.
Yes. And then Holloway says, I had the problem and solved it the way Juan has mentioned. It worked like a charm. All right. Thank you, Holloway. Good to know, to confirm there. And George posted a link there for YouTube. George, what link is that? For what?
Sorry, I was trying to do two things at once. Yeah, that's the your session last month with the discussion of SSMA. And
Okay,
it
great.
includes timestamp Rowversion. So if you use that link, you'll find that video that Juan's talking about.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. All right. So a couple things regarding the code that you're getting. All right. You're free to use it. Please don't sell it, right? You know, you're free to modify it. You're free to use it on all your projects. All we ask is that you don't sell it, right? You can put it in your application that you then sell. The whole application, if you're selling the whole application, you're welcome to use it in your applications that you're selling, but don't go out there and say, you know, this is my relinker tool, and it turns out this is almost an exact copy of what we just do. Please don't do that. The other aspect of this is when Mark hovers over a TBL document, you'll see it pops up the connection string. Mark, can you move your cursor over TBL document table? When you do that, notice that comes up with the connection string, which is great. A lot of code on the web for DSN-Less connections will also show the password. And so you're probably wondering, how is it that we can have DSN connections without the password? Well, it so happens that Microsoft Access opens connections with the SQL Server for you, right? There's no way for us to limit how many connections Microsoft Access, or how it opens the connection to SQL Server. It's one of the drawbacks to Microsoft Access. The old technology that was SQL Server based, Microsoft Access, we had one single connection, but now this database that, even now with this application that Mark has, he might have 2, 3 connections to SQL Server. There's no way to control it, except for when you use my easy ADODB methodology in your code. You can, as a developer, limit your code to just one connection. You can funnel all your traffic to one connection, which IT loves, right? IT hates seeing all these connections to the SQL Server from, so imagine, if you will, your Access application opens 3 connections, and it's multiplied by 20 users. That's 60 connections across 20 users. And if there is a license requirement by connection, I don't see this hardly these days. Usually it's by CPU, but there are versions of SQL Server that they sell by connection. You can quickly run out, and then people get locked out of the SQL Server. Anyway, my whole point of this discussion is, if you look closely at the code that Mark is providing, you'll see that he actually initiates a query to SQL Server to open the connection. This is based on the blog post from Ben Clothier, who's an architect at our firm and multi-book author, along with George Hepworth on the call. He's also a multi-book author on Microsoft Access. He's the one that first came out with this technique of initiating a query on startup to create that connection in Access, and any subsequent connections do not require a username and password. So that's why when you look at this code they're providing you, it starts with that little query, and then we don't have to save the password and the link tables. All right.
I've used Ben's code in many of my apps.
Yes, truly remarkable. Probably one of the most intelligent people on the planet when it comes to Microsoft Access.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is my complaint with him. And it says, Ben, you write all this code because we have some amazing tools that are proprietary at IT Impact, and he writes these amazing tools. And you know, I'm an Access MVP. I consider myself a smart man, but wow, you know, to follow that code of his, it's just hard. It's just hard. You over-engineers the hell out of it. And maybe Mark Edwards can make hay or way with that code of his, but sometimes I'm like, Ben, you're a ship in the sea way ahead of us. You have to wait for all these other ships to catch up, all the other developers. But we created this tool based on the code that Ben has developed, higher end code. Our code base, we call it Ben's last name is Clothier, so you can search for him on the blog, Ben Clothier. Our code base at IT Impact, we're known worldwide for optimizing access to SQL Server. So we get a lot of calls throughout the day. Hey, can you help us with this database? Can you help us with this application? We've actually helped some people on this call, which I will not name. They're clients of mine. And so we have what we call an IT Impact framework that's highly optimized for SQL Server. And it was developed by Ben Clothier, and all our applications use it. And why we do that is because if a developer goes on vacation or somebody's sick, not available, somebody can step in. So if Mark created the application with the framework, he's on vacation, I need to troubleshoot something because we're all using the same framework, we're all using the same code. It's a lot easier. It's highly optimized for SQL Server to the point where we achieve some tremendous optimizations and being able to run with access on the local desktop and the servers on the cloud on Azure or some other various states away, and people don't know there's a difference. So we're really happy with this framework that we developed over the years. Some of that is incorporated in this example here. So tonight we're releasing some of that here for your benefit.
Hey, Juan,
yes.
Do you happen to remember there's a table in SQL Server that a SQL Server DBA can configure so that people cannot store a password in a linked table from Access? Do you happen to remember what that table is? And
I honestly don't know that you can do that from our SQL Server. I don't know of any feature in SQL Server that will prevent you from storing the password and access.
I have read about it.
Send it to me, that'd be great. If you can send it to me, that'd be great. Thank you. That'd be awesome. I'd love to read about that. George, have you heard of something like that where you can configure SQL Server to prevent saving passwords and access?
It vaguely rings a bell, but no.
How about you, Mark? Have you heard of that?
No, that needs to be.
I know it's possible. It's just I don't remember the name of the table.
Yeah. Mark, if you can, before we move away from you, can you open that Pass-Thru Query in design view? I want to show the folks on the phone here some pretty cool stuff that you can do with that Pass-Thru Query and Access.
Ooh, you could ask ChatGPT my question.
There you go. So the query here, Pass-Thru Query, says select username as SQL Server username, right? Can you run this query for me, Mark, so they can see the results of this query? All right, so it's DBO, right? So I'm retrieving the username. Let's go back into SQL Server, design view, excuse me. Let's go back in design view of the query. And let's give it a generic code, right? So let's do select space at version. So that's a SQL Server command, at version, right? Just that, select at version and run that. Let's see what it comes back with. So at is a special kind of variable in SQL Server. Get rid of everything else. It just comes back with the version. Well, Mark is being fancy. Now he's calling it version table. So he's being fancy about that, but let's see what it comes back with. So this is the version. It's a really long thing. So this is, I'm not kidding when I can say that you can do anything with SQL Server code that you normally can do with the GUI. So it's just a great way of leveraging this. Now I can create a stored procedure, right? And I've done this in my Access applications. I've actually created a stored procedure as a pass-through query and use that to execute some things. Like why would I do that? Well, for example, sometimes we create a VBA module, a VBA procedure that does a query, and then it cycles through all the records in the output of that query, and then it runs a secondary query, and then it does this and does that. You can't do it all in one query or a chain of queries, right? Ideally, we want to do it in a query or a chain of queries where query 2 is based on query 1, query 3 is based on query 2. Instead, we have to create a VBA. Well, you could, in theory, create a store procedure that does the same thing in a Pass-Thru query, run that, and get the results back. I don't recommend that. I have only done that one or twice. Why don't I recommend that? Because that store procedure is not stored on SQL Server. That store procedure is stored here in this Pass-Thru query, and therefore it gets executed and is new to SQL Server. Right. So every time I send the store procedure to SQL Server, oh, here, this new SQL Server procedures that's stored. Okay, let me execute it. If instead you save that store procedure on the server, there's a query plan that gets stored along with it that you can optimize, right? So I'll give you a good example of why you want to save it on SQL Server. You may have an application run by 20 people that's using that store procedure a lot. Maybe it's used at startup. Maybe it's used on a particular form. Maybe it's used on a report that's frequently called up. SQL Server is smart enough to see that your users are invoking that store procedure so often, it will actually save that store procedure in memory, so the next user who comes along will execute far faster than reading it from hard drive. So I always encourage you to have your store procedures and views stored. Same thing with views. You can run a view, you can create a view here in the Pass-Thru query and never save on a SQL Server, but then you're not it's not optimized with a query plan as well. Neither can you tweak the query plan, or it will keep it in memory because it's not stored in SQL Server. It's something you pass along via the connection link. This is why when you create a report that's very popular, the first couple of people run it, it runs slower than the last couple of people who run it, right? The last couple of people who run this report, they're like, wow, this report is pretty quick. And the first Schmo who runs it, like, oh, you know, he's sitting there with his thumbs, twiddling his thumbs. I've actually seen that effect on forms and reports. Now, you know, the difference is not much, because back in the old days, back when I had hair on my head and memory was at a premium, you could tell the difference. But these days, not as much, but I still like to do that. All right. Any questions for Mark Edwards here before we move on?
I have something I want to add, and that is I am going to have to go back and test and probably make some little changes to enable the Windows authentication. I don't think I included that because we were going to use SSA on this. So the demo app that we've got out right now is probably just going to be login only, but I'm going to fix that here, make sure that the Windows authentication works also for you folks who are using.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Klaus, looks like Klaus came up with a reason why that bug comes up. It only comes up if you try to cluster fields different to primary keys so that you create a non-clustered primary key index. Thinking about Alphonse agrees with Klaus. Okay, thank you, Klaus, very much. Klaus will rescue again. Greg Taylor, don't you have to have read-write access to create or update tables in SQL Server using a path? Yes, that's a great point, Greg. If you're going to create a Pass-Thru query, that's an action query, right? And by the way, Mark, can you go back into the properties of that Pass-Thru query again? If you're going to create a Pass-Thru query, that's an action query. What is an action query? Delete, update, insert, right? You can define that returns records set to no. So if Mark says, okay, if this is an update query, you want to set the return records to no, the property and access the query, right? That way it's not waiting for empty records in SQL Server to come back, which we'll never do if you're using an action query. But you do need to have the right permissions. Now, next month, excuse me, we're not having a meeting next month because I'm traveling to Boston. I'm sorry, to Tampa to see another customer in Tampa. But or maybe Mark will take over the mantle next month. We'll see. But for now, we don't have a meeting next month. But in March, we're going to talk about SQL Server security models and how to configure your SQL Server security to work with Active Directory domains. But you have to take into account security is pretty important in any SQL Server application. So yes, Greg, make sure you have some permissions. Ben says, Tom, is this the password blocking feature you were thinking of? That looks right, Ben. Let me see. Learn Microsoft. Save password checkbox not available when you link ODBC tables. Oh, interesting. I haven't seen this. But Mark, are you seeing this, Edwards? Are you seeing this? Blog
Where
post
is that?
in the chat. There's
Yeah,
a
but it-
link that Ben S. Oh man, this
Yes,
is
MSysConf table. That's it. On the SQL database.
wow. That's interesting. I never thought that the SQL Server can prevent access from doing something. Wow,
Well, it
interesting.
would probably, I think it also prevents Excel, anything that can
Yeah.
link to it.
Yeah, I guess because it's the Microsoft Access platform, right? These programs respect this flag and SQL Server. They probably modify the program code and Access Excel, Word, and any other program that's interfacing with SQL Server. All right. Any more questions for Mark before we go switch off to the next topic?
But the content says it's not for Excel, it's just for Access.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, you mentioned the save password checkbox is unavailable. It is only it applies only to Access, not to Excel.
Only at the Access, not the Excel.
Yeah,
Okay.
is here in the article.
Okay.
The article says it applies to Access 2016, 2013, and Access for Microsoft 365. Access.
Okay. Yeah. George also mentioned that. So thank you very much, Klaus and George. You guys both mentioned at the same time. Thank you very much. All right. Mark Edwards, I'm having a problem with my chat. I'm going to pass you
I know my
URL.
too.
URL. It says direct message. All right. I'm going to give you guys the URL for downloading the demo. And let's see, it's only going to Mark B, from me to Mark B. How do I set this to work? So it says direct message in the chat. How do I set this to work? Let me turn chat off on my end. Give me a second here, meeting. Let me see if I can.
There should be a drop down in chat that you can select.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. There's a drop down there. All right, there's a close chat. Let me bring in back chat. Let's say meeting, view, show chat. Oh, it still says direct message there. For some reason, I'm not able to pick everybody in the meeting here. Save chat, participant can chat with no one. There we go. Here we go. Everyone. All right, let's see. Here's the link. Is it just Mark B getting this? Mark B, you're the only getting this? Let's see. Let me see. At everyone. Let me fetch at everyone. I've got it. Mark B, can you share that with everybody, please? For some reason, I'm not able to share that with everybody. Thank you, Mark. That's weird. Okay. All right. Anything we got? I know Banu might have some additional. There's the link, by the way. Download it now. And please don't share it with anybody who didn't come up to the meeting, right? Because I want to make sure there's a 30-day embargo. Because I want to motivate people to come to our meetings. All right. Any other questions regarding this ODBC DSN connections before we open the floor to any questions? Any additional questions at all? All right. So let's go ahead and have it, guys. You guys have any more questions regarding Access, SQL Server, generic questions? Banu, do you still have some questions? Not sure if I'm saying that correctly. All right. Nobody has more questions or comments? All right. Well, I'd like to thank Mark Edwards for showing up tonight. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Round of applause for Mark, everyone, with his great job work on the all right. And please join us again in March. I don't think we're going to have February because I'm going to be traveling for Valentine's, and I don't think most of you guys have hot dates for Valentine's. So I don't think we're going to be having a Valentine's session February 14th. So there are no session the following month, March. We're going to be concluding the Access Academy with SQL security, how to leverage Active Directory domains in your security. So for example, when you hire a new employee, you put them in a particular directory group, and now they have all the rights for that role. So you have an admin group in your Windows Active Directory, and you put people there. Now they're admins in your database, or you have a power users group or a read-only group. So please join us for that. If you love this session, please join our Access with SQL Server LinkedIn group, where you can leave comments on the. If you want to thank us, please leave comments. You can tweet about today's meeting at jsoto22. That's my Twitter handle at jsoto22, and mention how you liked or didn't like the meeting. If this is your first time joining us, please register at AccessUserGroups.org. You can register to multiple chapters. We have the lunch chapter. We have the Pacific chapter that's being done, that George Hepworth heads up. Thank you, George, for all your work. Alphonse, I believe, is from Europe, to Europe chapter. Thank you so much. And this has been your humble servant, Juan Soto. Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for coming.
All right.
Right.
Take care.
Yeah,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Juan?
Bye-bye.